Welcome to Criminal Conversations, where your hosts will take you through some of the most fascinating crime stories in under 20 minutes. If you're looking for a quick and engaging deep dive into the world of true crime, you've come to the right place.
Welcome back to Criminal Conversations. As the veil between worlds thins this Halloween season, we're taking a deep dive into a case that truly embodies that chilling intersection of crime, superstition, and that shadowy side of human nature.
That's right. We're stepping back in time to 1803, to the dimly lit streets of Hammersmith, London, a place where whispers of a spectral entity gripped the community, really gripped the community with fear.
This isn't just your average ghost story, though.
Right.
This is a case with a real victim, a very real trial, and legal ramifications that echoed for centuries.
Huge ramifications.
Yeah, so buckle up, because the story of the Hammersmith Ghost is as twisty as those fog-laden lanes it was said to haunt.
And it is a chilling story. Now, to truly grasp the gravity of what unfolded, we need to set the scene.
Okay.
Hammersmith in 1803 wasn't the bustling borough we know today.
Right.
Imagine, if you will, a village on the outskirts of London, a place where darkness clung to the narrow streets, and superstition held sway.
And superstition was practically woven into the fabric of life back then, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The fear of ghosts in particular was incredibly potent. Suicide, considered a grave sin, was believed to leave a soul restless, unable to find peace. Imagine the weight of that belief, the terror of encountering a spirit trapped between this world and the next.
You can practically feel the hairs on the back of your neck stand up just thinking about it. So, in this climate of fear and unease, enters our infamous Hammersmith Ghost. What do we know about these alleged sightings?
Well, they started as whispers, tales of a towering figure draped in white spotted in the darkness near Hammersmith churchyard. Some accounts mention glowing eyes, others horns. You have to remember, this wasn't just some far-fetched tale.
Right.
People were genuinely terrified.
And these weren't just fleeting glimpses either, right? We have some pretty detailed accounts from people claiming to have come face to face with this entity.
Exactly. There's the story of a wagon driver responsible for a carriage full of people who was so unnerved by the apparition that he quite literally abandoned his post and fled. Then there's the account of a pregnant woman who, after allegedly being confronted by this white figure, died.
Oh gosh.
It was said from the shock alone.
Whether those stories were true or embellished, the impact was undeniable.
Oh, absolutely.
Fear had a very real grip on Hammersmith.
It did. And it wasn't just the fear of encountering the spectral figure itself. There were reports of physical attacks, like the one described by a brewer's servant, Thomas Groom. He claimed to have been grabbed from behind while walking through the churchyard. His companion swore he saw nothing, but Groom insisted he felt something, akin to a heavy coat, as he struggled against his unseen assailant.
Okay, now that's just creepy.
Indeed. And then we have William Girdler, the night watchman, who claimed to have chased the figure, describing it as a person concealed beneath a white shroud. But the truly unsettling detail: Girdler insisted the figure vanished right before his eyes. Now, keep in mind, London didn't have a formal police force at this time, so figures like Girdler played a crucial role in maintaining order.
So his account would have held a lot of weight, especially considering he was tasked with protecting the community.
Precisely, and this wasn't just a matter of chasing shadows anymore. This supposed ghost had become a public safety concern, fueling a wave of panic that washed over Hammersmith.
With the community on edge and fear escalating, it's no surprise that some people took it upon themselves to confront this perceived threat. They formed armed patrols, determined to put an end to the reign of terror, so to speak. And that, I believe, is where our story takes a very dark turn. It's almost as if the stage was set for tragedy. You know, when on the night of January 3rd, 1804, a young excise officer named Francis Smith decided to join one of these armed patrols.
Yeah, Smith, by all accounts, was convinced that he was, doing his civic duties, stepping up to protect his community from a very real threat. He had been drinking that night, which, likely fueled his courage, and armed himself with a shotgun before heading out into the darkness.
I can only imagine the tension in the air that night. The darkness, punctuated by flickering lanterns, the rustling of leaves mistaken for footsteps, every shadow taking on a sinister shape.
And as Smith patrolled these darkened streets, another figure was making his way home after a visit with family.
Okay.
This was Thomas Millwood, a 22-year-old bricklayer. And here's where the details of his attire become incredibly significant.
Okay, this is where that whole wrong place, wrong time, wrong clothes saying comes into play, right?
Precisely. You see, bricklayers at that time wore a uniform of sorts. white linen trousers, a white flannel waistcoat, and often a white apron dusted with plaster. This seemingly innocuous detail would seal Millwood's fate.
Because, of course, he was essentially dressed like a walking ghost.
Exactly. There had even been instances where Millwood himself had frightened people with his white attire. In fact, his own wife had begged him to cover up for fear of being mistaken for the Phantom.
And did he listen?
He did not. Whether it was stubbornness or perhaps a touch of bravado, Millwood disregarded his wife's warnings and walked straight into a confrontation he couldn't have anticipated.
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? The way these events seem to align so perfectly, leading to such a tragic outcome.
It is. It's a reminder that reality can be stranger and often crueler than fiction. As Millwood made his way down Beaver Lane, a dark, narrow road lined with hedges, he was spotted by Smith.
Concealed in the shadows, his mind likely racing with every whispered tale of the ghost, Smith called out, demanding the figure identify itself.
But Millwood, either unable to hear the warnings above the wind or perhaps assuming it was just another group of ghost hunters, didn't respond. He just kept walking.
And that's when Smith, his mind clouded by fear and alcohol, convinced he was facing the dreaded Hammersmith Ghost, made a decision that would change everything.
He raised his shotgun and fired. The shot hit Millwood in the jaw, killing him instantly.
It's hard to imagine the moments after that gunshot, the smoke clearing, the echo of that fatal blast hanging in the air, and the horrifying realization dawning on Smith that he hadn't shot a ghost at all.
No. He had killed a young man returning home from a family visit, his white work clothes mistaken for a ghostly shroud. The aftermath, as you can imagine, was pure chaos. Girdler, the night watchman, arrived on the scene to find Millwood dead and identified him as someone he'd previously encountered, adding another layer of tragedy to the situation.
What's truly chilling is that Millwood's own sister was among the first to discover his body, her screams piercing the night as she recognized her brother lying lifeless in the street.
It's a stark reminder that beneath the sensational headlines and tales of the supernatural, there was a very real human cost to this tragedy. A life cut short, a family shattered, and a community left grappling with the consequences of its own fear.
And of course, the legal ramifications were unavoidable. Smith was arrested and charged with murder, his fate now resting in the hands of the court. The trial, held at the Old Bailey, captivated the nation, becoming a spectacle that transcended the confines of the courtroom.
It became a battleground of sorts where the rational world of law and evidence collided with, the lingering specter of superstition. The prosecution presented a clear case, emphasizing Smith's intoxicated state, his self-proclaimed mission to hunt the ghost, and ultimately his rash actions that led to Millwood's death.
And then there's Millwood's widow, forced to relive the horror of that night, recounting her pleas for her husband to change out of his white work clothes, knowing her warnings had gone tragically unheeded.
Right, but Smith's defense was equally compelling, if not more so. They argued that he'd acted out of a genuine belief that he was facing a supernatural threat, that his actions, however misguided, were driven by a desire to protect his community.
So it essentially boiled down to this. Could the law hold him accountable for murder if he truly believed he was acting in self-defense against a phantom?
This question, as you can imagine, sparked a legal debate that reverberated throughout England. The judge, Lord Chief Baron Sir Archibald MacDonald, ultimately ruled that while believing in a ghost was one thing, using that belief to justify taking a human life was another matter entirely.
It seems like a classic case of, what constitutes a reasonable fear. The law couldn't exactly account for shooting at shadows, so to speak.
Exactly. MacDonald's ruling highlighted, the critical concept of mens rea criminal intent. Whether Smith believed he was shooting a ghost or a living person, the act of firing the gun, coupled with the fact that he had consumed alcohol prior, demonstrated a level of culpability that the law could not ignore.
So what was the verdict? Was the jury swayed by Smith's claim of self-defense against the supernatural?
It's actually a fascinating turn of events. The jury, clearly torn between the law and the pervasive belief in the supernatural, initially returned a verdict of manslaughter. They seemed to acknowledge that Smith's belief, however misguided, should be considered.
But MacDonald wasn't satisfied with that verdict.
He was not. He rejected it outright, instructing the jury that it was a clear-cut case of murder or acquittal. The jury, with that directive, deliberated again and ultimately found Smith guilty of murder but recommended mercy, likely acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances surrounding the case.
And what about Smith's sentence? Did the judge take their recommendation into consideration?
He did. Smith was sentenced to death, but his sentence was later commuted to 1 year of hard labor. It's believed that the jury's recommendation, coupled with the immense public interest in the case and possible pressure from King George III himself, contributed to the commutation.
It's a reminder that justice, even back then, wasn't always black and white. But what about the Hammersmith Ghost? Did it just vanish after the trial?
Well, remember John Graham, the shoemaker, who confessed to dressing up as the ghost to frighten his apprentices? It adds a strange twist to the story, especially considering he sang at Millwood's funeral. However, some argue that Graham's confession doesn't account for all of the sightings.
So were there copycats capitalizing on the hysteria? Or was there something more to those tales of a glowing-eyed specter with horns? And what about those reports of a new Hammersmith ghost after the trial? This one, even more menacing, breathing fire and wielding hooks.
It's a question that continues to intrigue and baffle. Did the events of 1804, the fear, the trial, the tragic death of Thomas Millwood, somehow breathe life into a legend, paving the way for others to perpetuate the myth? Perhaps even inspiring figures like Spring-Heeled Jack, who terrorized London decades later.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? The line between reality and folklore, belief and perception, can be incredibly thin, especially when fear takes hold. What do you think, listeners? Was it mass hysteria? A series of hoaxes? A genuine supernatural entity? Or perhaps a blend of all three? The truth, much like the fog-shrouded streets of Hammersmith itself, remains elusive. Until next time, thanks for joining us on this chilling journey into the heart of a crime that continues to haunt us centuries later. Sleep tight, and if you happen to see a shadowy figure in white, best not to ask any questions.
Thanks for listening to Criminal Conversations. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to rate and review. It makes a huge difference and really helps us out. All of the sources used for today's episode can be found in the show notes. Join us every Monday and Thursday for a new story and another criminal conversation.